I know that you must be on your way. On your way. On your way. On your way.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today, I want to talk to you about America and the religion of no religion. And yes, I'm actually talking about a somewhat tradition in and of itself. We'll be getting into really a sort of hodgepodge of belief systems. But generally speaking, we kind of call them the espionars, people who are spiritual but not religious. This is a sort of another name for what we're talking about. But anybody who's actually read the book by Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, Esalen in America, the Religion of No Religion. In fact, I have it, and I forgot to grab it. Let me grab it 1 second. So this book right here, if anybody's ever read this book, America and the Religion of No Religion by Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, it is a worthwhile book because we're going to be referencing the Esalen Institute and the Human Potential Movement specifically. Now, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, he's a very prominent scholar in the field of Western esoteric traditions. He has the GEM program, the GEM. This is the Gnostic, Esoteric, Mystical PhD program at Rice University. And the way that I got ingratiated to his work and really all his stuff, I have tons of his books over there, is I used to, my undergraduate professor of Indian religions, of Hinduism, Jainism, and she was doing a lot of research focused on yoga. And during my undergraduate program, I started getting interested in some of those names like Alan Watts and Terence McKenna and Aldous Huxley. And she turned me on to some of the scholarship of her mentor, again, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal. And we're going to be watching and listening to a presentation that he has about this book, about, again, this thesis of America and the Religion of No Religion. Now, as you'll notice, once we listen to his presentation, he is very promotive and supportive of this particular dispensation of religious perspective. And so I want to first lay out what it is we're going to be diving into and what exactly is this religion of no religion, because obviously this is not, as you might think, a discussion about atheism or agnosticism, like being agnostic, not Gnosticism, because actually this has a lot of relationships with Gnosticism, generally speaking, especially its existential components in regards to the development of human potential. We'll find out as we lay out some of the stuff we're going to be diving into. The concept, one of the fundamental presuppositions of this worldview of the religion of no religion, is one, perennialism, the idea that all religions are sort of antiquated, and that, yeah, they are useful, they're pragmatically useful, they're utilitarianly useful, they're also psychologically useful, but really what religion's all about is the development of human potential. And so the instances of clairvoyance or super sensory perception or all these different things, these mystical experiences, these are the sort of sine qua non of religion, and religion and the dogmas and the theologies. These are just sort of extrapolations of really the important stuff, right? The important stuff being mysticism and these experiences that people have of supernatural abilities. And so places like the Esalen Institute, beginning in the 1950s, but then really through the 1960s, their sole focus was interested in researching and discovering these human potentials, the development of human potentiality. And this led into its own sort of spiritual movement known as the Human Potential Movement. And this focus on the development of human potential is obviously rooted within an evolutionary perspective, but this gave way to, again, what Dr. Kripal is trying to describe of Esalen, America and the Religion of No Religion, is this idea that towards the end of the 20th century and certainly moving forward into the 21st century, if you're going to be on the leading edge of this enterprise or this discovery that we call world religions, really you shouldn't belong to any one of these traditions because, again, they're all antiquated. And that now with our scientific understanding, with our psychological understanding of the human person, that we should now be focused on the development of human potential. Human potential. And you'll see how this, obviously, transhumanism and some of the other topics that I talk about is a branch off of this human potential movement, which human potential movement is really rooted in this religion of no religion. So this religion of no religion is really a sort of libertarian religion, and it is sort of very American in its sort of posture. I mean, the religion of no religion is ironically one of the things that they will talk about, and we'll hear Dr. Jeffrey Kripal discuss, is, you know, the making universal claims, the dogmas of religion, how, oh my gosh, this stuff is so limiting to your human potential. Ironically, they make their own dogmas in the resistance against dogma itself. Now, the religion of no religion, this is not the absence of spiritual belief. Okay, I've looked up, if you start searching like the religion of no religion or no religion, people, there's already articles about atheism and agnosticism, or being agnostic, or just being, having no disposition towards religion whatsoever. That is not what we're talking about. The religion of no religion is very spiritual. It's very spiritual. The idea, one, is it's fundamentally based in perennialism, which we've already discussed. One of the problems with perennialism itself is the epistemic basis of it, right? How can we make claims that all the religions lead to the same mountaintop, which is usually the analogy and the metaphor they use, if, in fact, some of the paradigmatic basis of these different world religions are totally contradictory? How can a religion such as Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism, who posit the an-atman, the lack of a soul, there is no ontological real existence to me other than the collection of karma, and that there is no ultimate deity, a creator deity. Buddhism doesn't posit any of that. How exactly is that leading me to the exact same place as any of the monotheistics, the Abrahamic religions, and so forth and so on? Well, obviously, one of the problems is you really can't make the claim that all religions lead to the same place, because you're not using the epistemological foundation of Hinduism or Buddhism or Christianity or Islam to make that claim. You are sort of outside of all these traditions, and yet you have some type of authority, epistemic authority, to then claim that they're all moving in the same place. So one of the basic foundations is this perennialism, which is already an epistemic problem. And they're going to, and as we listen to Dr. Kripal, he's going to be very straightforward that the universal truth claims is a big problem, and that the religion of no religion is not trying to do that. Ironically, by actually making a dogma to not be dogmatic is in fact the creation of a dogma, and in fact that is a sort of universal truth claim. And we're going to see this throughout today. We're going to see that the religion of no religion is ultimately contradictory. Again, as we would, anybody, right, that says, well, truth is relative, that itself is a universal objective claim that you're claiming about the relativity of truth. You're an idiot. So the fundamental basis is that it's built on perennialism, and that religion has been pragmatically important for the evolutionary development of man. And so religion is useful. Religion is good in this worldview, because what it does is it pragmatically aids in our evolutionary development. It pragmatically aids in my understanding of how to emote when somebody dies, how to grieve. And so religion then is pragmatically useful. But again, according to this worldview, we have now evolved beyond the utility of any of these one world religions. And so we need a new religion. We need a new structure. And so Dr. Kripal, I've seen him talk about the belief in belief and not beliefs. What is he talking about? He's talking about, again, the placebo effect, the utility of belief, the utility of faith in something that's sort of in the future or something not yet manifested, and how this can be utilized as part of our own spiritual paradigm, our own spiritual worldview. So the religion is pragmatically important. And in a way, this is uniquely part of the American experience. You see, America in its secularism, this country is not founded in a sort of religious tradition itself. We can say, oh, well, America is a Christian nation. Well, generally speaking, the majority of the people who did come here were a variation of Christianity. However, they themselves didn't agree on a lot of stuff. They themselves were often ostracized from larger congregations, denominations. I mean, by the time of the Enlightenment and the American Project, we already had the Protestant Reformation and we already had the splintering of Christianity itself. And so it was often the people on the fringes who were being persecuted who made their way to America. So America itself is very religious, right? America is very religious. We can compare America right now to Europe and see that we are in fact way more religious despite even their traditional founding. So even Western Europe, I mean, the southern Western Europe, the Catholic countries, they still have some remnants of their religious tradition. All the Protestant nations are no longer, there is no Christianity in Sweden and England. I mean, of course, there is, and I know many of you Orthodox guys and gals, you're from those countries, but you get my point. There is no Protestant nation that is still, quote unquote, Christian. It's no longer there. And America wasn't really rooted on any singular religious foundation. And so the mixture of sort of you finding your own religious purpose, you finding your own myth, your own story, your own ethos that's going to help you develop or deal with the world, well, that's kind of rooted within the American structure. And so the religion of no religion, in a way, is the American secularism itself. Though, again, the religion of no religion is not secularism. Though, again, we'll find that it has some interesting contradictions. America accepts religion essentially as important to man, but not as a holistically integrated worldview. You see, in America, we do not have religion is not dictating how we understand our government or things. Now, yes, they used to put their hand on the Bible, but as a holistically integrated worldview, I mean, we have a sort of libertarian structure. These assumptions that we're all working off the same framework. And again, we'll see this exact same thing within the religion of no religion, is that it doesn't make any universal claims. The problem is all these dogmatic religions making claims about objective truth. And yet, at the same time, they themselves are doing the exact same thing. So the religionless religion is just as dogmatic and similar to the forms of religion which they say they don't like. Their dogmas, the first dogma is dogmatic about not being dogmatic, but progressive. Well, that itself is a dogma. And this religion of no religion that we're going to talk about absolutely believes itself to be on the evolutionary frontier of humankind. And that's why transhumanism, though many transhumanists may not identify as being part of the religion of no religion, transhumanism itself is going to be coming out of this movement developed in the 60s, this human potential movement mixed with psychedelics, psychology, and even technology. And so you can look at Silicon Valley really being a place in which all this milieu of presuppositions and practices and spiritual pursuit come together in the development of digital technologies themselves. And so blending with our digital technologies is an obvious logical follow if we in fact are going to divinize ourselves and then develop our human potential. Because one of the things about this worldview is you're going to hear Dr. Kripal in fact say that human nature is divine. Because this religion of no religion has no creator God. This religion of no religion perceives itself to be so much more superior to all the world religions. This religion of no religion views itself as scientific and, the frontier of humanity itself. And at one point, I was totally bought in. That's why this stream is something I want to share with you guys, is because when I go back and I listen to Dr. Kripal and I listen to the elucidation of America and the religion of no religion, all I can think about is how I bought this stuff hook, line, and sinker when I was younger. And so now my worldview, my perspective, who I am, has evolved, it's changed, it's developed. I've worked at it, I've read, I've grown. And yet when I go back and I hear these ideas, it's a sort of cacophony. It's chaotic. It's not appealing anymore. I hear it and I'm thinking, well, what the hell? How are you making all these truth claims about religion and perennialism or human potential and evolution, and yet at the same time want to criticize people who are making universal objective claims about religion itself, or that one religion is more superior to the other, which in fact, they then are claiming that the religion of no religion is more superior than any one religion. Well, aren't you doing the exact same thing that you just said you hate about other religions? And we're going to notice that over and over and over again. So they're dogmatic about not making universal claims, except in their universal criticisms of all world religions, or people who choose one world religion as superior to any other one. So we're going to find that they do the exact same thing that they hate. And what's funny is this whole movement, as Dr. Kripal will talk about, this religion of no religion spawns out of the women's movement, again, the 1960s counterculture, the psychedelic revolution, the gay revolution, the sexual revolution, and how all these things are wonderful, the Marxist revolution of the 60s, how all these things coalesce together and again, and move us forward. And so it's funny because the criticisms by many of the counterculture about capitalism and the problems of capital, and I'm not here to defend capitalism at all, but what I find so interesting is that their religion of no religion is way more consumeristic. It's the commodification of religion itself, that we can just go to the Esalen Institute and we can practice that form of yoga and then that Zen type of meditation, and we can do this over here and we can do that right there. Well, what do you do? They criticize capitalism. They want to criticize, these ways in which Americans consume goods, which, okay, rightfully so, but yet your spirituality is doing the exact same thing. What are you talking about? And that is another attribute of why the religion of no religion is a very American process. Now, I'm not saying that the religion of no religion hasn't spread to the rest of the Western world or even growing across the world, generally speaking, because it is. But the way it's so uniquely American is that America was always searching for the frontier. America was the last frontier. When people were going from east to west, and eventually they reached California. And that's the end of the frontier, the gold rush. We move into the 20th century, and it seems like there is no unexplored territory in the world. And what happens is we see that the California and the 60s culture is that what the new frontier is the self. It's the person, it's humanity. The new frontier is my own mind. The new frontier is my own human potential. And that is exactly how the people who perceive these things that is how they perceive them, who are working at places like the Esalen Institute, and that we're part of this human potential movement, is that the new frontier is the mind itself. And it is the development or the existential pursuit of my own human potential, because according to them, the human nature is divine. Again, but no, you as a person, oh yeah, you're probably fallible. Yeah, you're probably bad. You're going to hear Dr. Kripal reference this. Oh yeah, the people, yeah, they're all types of problems, but human nature is divine. Human nature is divine. So we see that this has a very Luciferian, another apotheotic worldview. The whole idea is that we're going to divinize ourselves. We're going to divinize ourselves through whatever means possible, usually some type of technological means. And so progress is really, when you start to look at it, progress, according to the human potential, or according to the religion of no religion, is really the sort of challenging of Christian norms. Now, the human potential movement, Esalen, generally speaking, way more interest into the Eastern mysticism, Western magic, Gnosticism, shamanic tribal traditions. Those are many of the religious traditions they're going to pull from, and they're going to use often Islam in Christianity as how religion sort of can kind of go astray or stagnate or limit our own human development. And so when they talk about the 60s and where they come from and how this religion of no religion is the future, it's all rooted in this concept of progress, which believes that, again, you're going to hear it, the LGBTQ, obviously we see where that has led now, the women's movement, the eradication of traditional forms of authority. These are all progress. This is great. And this is part of this religion of no religion. So the evolutionary development of human potential is the theological foundation, and human nature, as I said, is divine. It's a Luciferian progressive dissolution of boundaries type of teleological spiritual telos, right? The whole telos of even world religions, generally speaking, the point of all the world religions is this sort of teleology of evolutionary development, right? So religions, all culturally constructed, not really important, but why they are important and why they're pragmatically good is they aided in our own human potential and development, and therefore the religion of no religion, this eradication of all these boundaries, the eradication of gender boundaries, the eradication of traditional boundaries. And obviously you could see why they would be in favor of a one world government, the eradication of national boundaries. Oh, we got to make sure World War II doesn't happen again, right? The Third Reich's going to come back if we don't dissolve all national boundaries. This is part of their presuppositional basis and consistent with so many other things that we've talked about before. And so you can see how this is an innately Gnostic worldview, the idea that I'm pursuing my own human potential, I'm pursuing spiritual knowledge, I'm pursuing the advancement of myself, I'm pursuing the actualization of my own divinization. I want to actualize my own divinity, and that's what this thing is really rooted in. And so you can see why transhumanism is an obvious branch from this tradition and why it's a logical follow. So what I want to do before we get going here is first show you guys a few things. So we'll be reading or listening to this right here, but you see this idea of the religion of no religion. This isn't just in the 20th and the 21st century. This has been perceived as a advancement of one's spiritual disposition. Here's Rumi. In every religion there is love, yet love has no religion. Oh yes, because again, what is love? Where does love come from? What's the metaphysical basis for love? Here's another one, H.P. Blavatsky. You know, everybody loves Helena Blavatsky. There is no religion higher than truth. Where does truth come from? How do we have access to truth? What is objective truth? How do we prove something to be true? She's part of she's the basis of the traditionalist school. Obviously, people know her from the various practices that she supported. But, here's another one. Rumi again, I belong to no religion. My religion is love. Every heart is my temple. And this is the type of rhetoric that we're also going to hear today. That this idea that belonging to any one specific religious tradition or making a claim of one's own religion being superior, that is ancient stuff. That is wrong thinking. You are the problem with the world. And Rumi and Blavatsky, with her theosophy, this is the future, right? This idea that we just got to mix everything together, find what's good, and develop our human potential. Here's Lauryn Hill. Real religion is no religion at all. Oh my gosh, that's so profound. Can you believe it? No religion, or real religion is no religion at all. I can't believe I didn't realize that. How insightful, guys. Here's another one. God has no religion, according to Mahatma Gandhi. Well, I beg to differ. And so you see, all this stuff is sort of rooted in this idea that we can just, oh no, my religion is love. No, my religion is truth. My religion is no religion at all. These are things that we're going to hear today, this type of rhetoric and framing of their own spiritual worldview. Now, why this stuff is important is because, and I've talked about this before, is the SBNRs, people who identify as spiritual, not religious, is now the largest single religious demographic in the United States. Yeah, people want to say, oh yeah, 70% of America, 70% of America is Christian. Well, the way they get that, even according to the Pew Research Center, is what they ask is, what do you identify as? And then, do you celebrate Christmas? Do you celebrate Easter? This type of thing. What we've seen, and I think 2017 was the first year where this transition has happened, and it's only gotten worse. This article right here is from 2020, I believe. No, this is 2017. Yeah, so 2017, and you can dive in. Like, here's one from 2016 that when Pew Research does the demographic study and asks people, how do you identify religiously? There's Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, all the different things. And at the end, there's none of the above, which includes atheism, agnosticism, and then spiritual but not religious. And so in 2017, what was significant is that we saw for the first time the spiritual but not religious, or the nuns, meaning not N-U-N, but N-O-N-Es, none of the above. The atheists, the agnostics, and the people identified as spiritual but not religious is the largest single religious demographic in the United States. In the United States, they separate Protestantism from Catholicism. And so technically, when the Pew Research Center does this research, those are not grouped together as Christianity. They can be, and you could look at that data that way if you wanted to, but they specifically differentiate Protestantism and Catholicism. And so competing with Catholicism and Protestantism, spiritual but not religious, or the nuns, are now larger than those. Now, if you put Protestantism, Catholicism together, obviously there's going to be more percentage than the spiritual, not religious, but that's what I mean by it being the largest religious demographic at this point. So this is a real happening right now, and this is all across the Western world, the idea that you don't want to belong to any single religion, because if you want to be more advanced and more knowledgeable, what you need to do is sort of appropriate, consume aspects of all of them. And so this, as I said, spiritual, not religious, these are called the SBNRs. You can look this up yourself if you want to learn more about it. Now, the Esalen Institute, what I was talking about was the human potential movement. And this arose out of the counterculture in the 1960s and formed around the concept of an extraordinary potential that advocates believed to lie largely untapped in all people. The movement takes as its premise the belief that through the development of their human potential, people can experience a life of happiness, creativity, and fulfillment, and that such people will direct their actions within society toward assisting others to release their potential. Adherents believe that the collective effect of individuals cultivating their own potential will be a positive change in society at large. And so, again, we're not going to get through this whole thing, but here's some of the prominent movers and shakers of this. You got Abraham Maslow, again, the psychologist, the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's what this triangle is right here, actually. So you see self-fulfillment needs, self-actualization as the top, because he was actually part of this human potential movement. And so he developed a sort of psychological framework for what are the psychological needs necessary so that one can then move into the development of one's potential. Now, a lot of this stuff all occurred at Esalen, which, again, if you read the book, and anybody who's familiar with that sort of subculture, the vast majority of people have doctorate degrees, graduate degrees, wealthy, they work in the tech field. And so it's so funny that despite their criticisms of some of the capitalistic structures or the ways traditional religions are, the culture that they're sort of inculcated in is filled with money, notable degrees and such from various institutions. And so it is their sort of own elite group that was so focused on this stuff. Anyways, I digress. We got Abraham Maslow, Alan Watts, Aldous Huxley, Carl Rogers, Chung-Liang, Al Huang, Fitz Perls, psychologist Fitz Perls, Gerald Hurd, prominent within development of the psychedelic revolution, Harvey Jackins, Viktor Frankl, William James, Anthony Robbins, meaning Tony Robbins, very much interested in this human potential movement. Michael Murphy, the founder of the Esalen Institute, and the list goes on and on and on. So, as we can see, this one is looking at religion in around the Western world, but notably, specifically in Europe, the rise of, again, no religion. Why no religion is the new religion. And so, again, consistent with some of these presuppositions. So, before we listen to Dr. Kripal, and that's what we're going to be doing the rest of this stream, is allowing one of the figureheads of this current movement, or at least one of the academics who's been a voice for the religion of no religion, kind of lay out what exactly the religion of no religion is, and going from there and regard its critiques and really what it is and why it's uniquely American, and why this is essentially the presupposition of many young people. As he talks about, Dr. Kripal, how thrilled he was that his daughter, when filling out her description on a dating website, was able to select spiritual but not religious, and how this identified the sort of presuppositions of the younger generation, and why this is going to be such a beneficial catalyst to the changing of society, and again, this furthering of the religion of no religion. So that's what we're going to be getting into. Guys, please smash that like for everybody who's here. If anybody would like to support the work that I do here in Church of the Eternal Logos, please become a website member. You can do so with this link right here. I would greatly appreciate that. There's 3 different types of memberships. There's a basic membership for access to a exclusive video library. There's the fitness membership that gives you access to another video library plus fitness meetings on the first Tuesday of every month. And then we have a premium membership that allows you access to all of that, plus 2 premium meetings twice every month in a select group of people. So if you'd like to participate in any of those, please join with the link there. Also, if anybody would like to sign up for a one-on-one session, you can do so here with this link. And if anybody would like to sponsor a stream, of which we have another sponsored stream I'll be doing this Friday on demonic magic. So shout out to Daniel Kim, where he asked me to dive into demonic magic, or various forms of magic that deal with demons, and how demons are utilized and conjured, spoken to. And so we're going to be diving into demonic magic Friday night. So if you are a little bit leery of some of those topics, maybe that one's not for you. But if you would like to learn more about what exactly demonic magic is, conjuration magic, possession, stuff like that, that is kind of what we're going to be doing this Friday. And that is a sponsored stream by our good ortho brother, Daniel Kim. Daniel Kim, shout out to you, brother. So with that being said, now let's just get into it. Guys, please hit that like for everybody who's here. I'd greatly appreciate that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is allow Dr. Kripal to tell us a little bit about the religion of no religion in his own words. So for the rest of this stream, we're going to be playing this audio, and we're going to be critiquing it and hearing about what exactly the religion of no religion is. So, unfortunately, of course, I wouldn't have my 1 second. I gotta plug this cord in. 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. Of course, it wouldn't be plugged in when I'm streaming, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Okay, so here we go. Listening to, again, Dr. Jeffrey Kripal. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Kripal, as I said, Rice Gym PhD program. So for example, one of the here you go. Anyways, yeah. So Like I said, Dr. Kripal is a big name in the field of Western esoteric studies. He has a Gnostic, esoteric, mystical program for PhD people at Rice University. And one of the big books that I've been telling people they should check out by Eric Davis, Technosis. Eric Davis actually recently just received his PhD from Dr. Kripal at Rice, dealing with some of these topics. Now, obviously, they're more supportive, but anyways, let's go ahead and dive into Dr. Kripal. And I got this a little sped up, so we're listening at 1.25, just FYI, so this is a little sped up. But without further ado, let's listen to what Dr. Kripal has to say.
You a quite formal lecture on what's called the religion of no religion, but which more of you would be familiar with as the spiritual but not religious worldview. And my basic goal here tonight is to explain to you why, certainly in its origins and certainly in its sort of logical structure or theology, this is not a fuzzy worldview. This is a very serious intellectual position that people are taking today, often without any understanding of where it comes from or its radicalism, really. But my goal here tonight is to kind of give you a sense for where this comes from and to help you appreciate it more. So I'm going to just begin. This evening I want to talk about the religion of no religion in two different modes. In the first mode, I want to address the religion of no religion philosophically or theologically. That is, I want to describe it as a kind of super logic or unconscious operating system that different historical figures and communities over the centuries have expressed, if never, of course, articulated in quite this way. In the second mode, I want to address the religion of no religion historically and culturally. That is, I want to describe very briefly the background of this orientation in the general history of religions and in a most recent cultural expression of it, the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. It was Esalen that spawned the human potential movement of the 1960s and 70s, which in turn helped seed the more popular New Age movement of the 1980s and 90s. Finally, I will end with a few comments about the American legal system, about the very real dilemmas of religious tolerance embedded in this category, and about that immense demographic of Americans below the age of 30 who now describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. So I have many goals this evening, and we only have 5 hours. So let us move quickly.
Okay, I'm going to speed this up to 1.5. So if he sounds like he's talking fast, it's because I'm speeding it up.
Part 1, the super logic of the religion of no religion. Let me begin with what the religion of no religion is not. The religion of no religion is not secularism, although as we will see, it depends upon a robustly secular society to flourish. Similarly, the religion of no religion is not atheism, although particular expressions of the religion of no religion may well be atheistic, and any religion of no religion will call into serious question the images of God that the typical believer assumes. So if the religion of no religion is not secularism or atheism, what is it? First and foremost, the religion of no religion is an implicit theory of religion and the religious imagination. Whether or not a particular figure or tradition articulates such a theory, this deep superlogic is in fact a radical way of understanding religion that simultaneously affirms and denies the symbolic expressions of the different religions.
And he'll talk about, so this affirming and denying of world religions, Dr. Kripal perceives as the non-dualism of this worldview, of this religion of no religion, and why in fact it is superior to then any sort of positivistic claim about any one specific tradition.
It affirms tradition, belief, and community as intimate, necessary, and creative responses to some original inbreaking of the sacred, some past revelation or enlightenment event. But it also insists that such expressions are always local and relative. In its more radical moments, the religion of no religion also insists that such inbreakings are not simply past, that new and different ones are potential and possible right now, right here. A kind of endless religious creativity is affirmed then, with no revelation or enlightenment event getting to claim itself as the last or final word. They do, of course, anyway, but that is not the religion of no religion. That is religion. It is very important at this juncture to emphasize both the positive and negative poles of such an understanding. As a theory of the religious imagination, the religion of no religion insists on the beauty and even truth of what is expressed and on the relative or local nature of that expression. We might say that its view of religion is essentially an artistic one, as long as we are willing to consider art, symbol, and myth as mediums of genuine truths that cannot be expressed in any other way. To borrow an image from my colleague Marcia Brennan, religion becomes here a kind of curating of consciousness, with the painter, the paint, and the painted understood to be all connected moments in an astonishing form of consciousness curating itself in the codes and material objects of public culture. That is a non-dual and frankly mind-bending way to express the matter, although I think it captures very accurately what we actually see in many extreme religious events, particularly those we today call paranormal. But that is another story.
And so the paranormal, and now, Dr. Kripal's done good research on looking at aliens and paranormal activities as, again, the sort of impetus of religion and religious yearnings. And so, I would agree with him that aliens or some of this stuff. Now, I obviously don't believe that aliens exist. I think that they're obviously a historically contextualized phenomenon, and that it's most likely associated with intelligence agencies, especially beginning in the Cold War after World War II. But yeah, let's continue here.
If we wish to be more ordinary and dualistic about the matter at hand, we might say that such a view of religion is simply a function of the manner in which the human psyche mediates, translates, and filters our experience of reality. Something is coming through, we might say. But if there is in fact a something, there is also and always a coming through. To say that something is coming through or mediated is to acknowledge both the something and the mediating process. And by acknowledging this, we will find ourselves affirming and denying each and every religious tradition.
You see, they affirm and deny every religious tradition, and they use these ethereal concepts like consciousness. Now, Dr. Kripal and I have an idea of what I think consciousness is, but in academic terms, there is no specific definition on what exactly consciousness is. And so in regards to the philosophy of mind, many theories. This is called the hard problem in neuroscience and the philosophy of mind, something that they haven't been able to solve. Of what is consciousness? What is the mind? What is this? And he's going to lay out the theory of the brain as a sort of a transducing valve. Right, so it is transducing your outer experience and your internal experience, and it's a receiver in a way. It's like your cable television, and so again, notice the rhetoric and the worldview that's going to be painted here. That this worldview both affirms and denies. That it allows, again, the development of human potential, that human nature is divine, that what we need to do is pursue these important, unique attributes of human experience, mysticism, paranormal activity, and whatnot, and that by pursuing those things, as Esalen did at certain points in its history, that this is going to allow us to move beyond our current state and sort of move away behind any singular one world religious tradition, because the religion of no religion is the religion of the future.
That is the basic moral paradox of the religion of no religion. Historically speaking, the origins of any religion of no religion inevitably lie in personal and often extremely dramatic mystical and visionary experiences. These are the psychodynamic base of the religion of no religion, which in turn produce any number of doctrines within a particular historical expression or coming through. These doctrines are generally Gnostic in orientation, by which I mean three things. I mean that they emerge from actual or empirical experiences of the divine within specific individuals. Secondly, I mean that these events often involve the realization of the divine human. That is, they locate divinity in and as human being.
So there we have a relationship again with like Luciferian worldviews, apotheosis. Divinity, as Christians, believing in theosis, is rooted in the Godhead of God himself. Again, through the incarnation, we can then participate in that divinity by being man, made in the image of God. And then, so within this worldview, there is no creator God, because this is a Big Bang evolutionary cosmology. And so there is no creator God, and divinity then is some sort of ethereal thing that we can't put our finger on, that humans throughout history have experienced. And since humans have experienced divinity must be rooted within human nature, and that we must be then divine, and we need to then pursue these practices and experiences that sort of allow us to peer behind the veil of ordinary consciousness.
And thirdly, I mean that the exponents of a religion of no religion often end up deconstructing simplistic notions of God out there. That is, any dualistic image of God deposits a divinity separate from human nature. Not every instance of the religion of no religion, of course, explicitly advances all three doctrines. Moreover, such realizations are usually embedded and expressed in elaborate mythological, doctrinal, and ritual contexts, few of which can really work for us today. Hence the crucial importance of the modern movements. Okay, part two. I am fully aware of how abstract that all sounded. Allow me then to put some flesh on these bones, as it were, with three historical examples. So we'll get meaty now from here on out. We just went through the tough part. Our first example, I'm going to give you three examples, but I'm not going to tell you who they were until the end. Our first example was a famous academic and preacher who begged his listeners, quote, to take leave of God for God. That is, to abandon their naive notions of God as an objective person out there. He could thus preach lines like this one, quote, simple people imagine that they should see God as if he stood there and they here. That is not so. God and I, we are one in knowledge, unquote.
So, again, he's referencing a Harvard theologian here that we're going to find out very quickly. And his whole thing is that, well, what you need to do is you need to give up your naive conception of God. Okay, agreed. We all have potentially naive personal conceptions of the Godhead that may not be accurate, rightfully so. However, now God is no longer a person. There is no personal relationship. The person of God is who you are. You are the person of God. And so that is sort of their personhood theology, or how they invert a personhood theology, is God himself is not a personal being, because God himself is your own divine nature, and you then are the person of God.
By knowledge, this man did not mean belief or some rationally argued thesis. He meant direct and immediate mystical experience. He meant what I have just named gnosis. True again to the triple gnosis of the religion of no religion, he taught the divinization of human nature. In his own Christian terms, the incarnation for him was not a single past event, but an eternal reality or process that is constantly taking place in the human soul, outside space and time. He thus considered human nature, as opposed to the human ego, to be divine. Listen. I say humanity and man are different. Humanity in itself is so noble that the highest peak of humanity is equal to the angels and akin to God. The closest union that Christ had with the Father, that is possible for me to win, could I but slough off what there is of this and that and realize my humanity.
Yeah, so we can realize our humanity. Human nature is divine. You as a person, you're probably an idiot. But if you actually worked on yourself, you could just be like Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, he was just a man who realized his own divinity, and that's how then he related to God the Father. You know, yeah, he was just like us, and we can be just like him.
True again to the triple gnosis, at the ground of all this man's teachings was a basic distinction that he drew between God and the Godhead, beyond God. God is the personal deity that comes into being when human beings pray or worship. We literally create God. The Godhead.
Yes, we create God. Again, and this is academic, insightful words. We create God because there definitely can't be any sort of transcendent metaphysical basis for the existence at all. That would be way too philosophical to make an argument for God or the necessity for a transcendental being of some sort. No, we just create God. It's all socially constructed.
This. Indeed, one of his most common descriptions of this Godhead beyond God was nikt, or nothing. By such a provocation, he did not mean nothing in the nihilistic sense. He meant that the Godhead was beyond space and time, and so could not be identified with any single thing or act located in space and time. The Godhead is literally no thing. He also referred to this nothing as the eternal now. There is neither time nor space in the eternal now. That is exactly why it is immortal and infinite. That is also why there can be no ego there. There is, as he put it, neither Henry nor Conrad there. As egos, of course, as Henrys and Conrads, we can hardly understand such things. But we can well recognize the religion of no religion in this man's God beyond God. Our second...
Yeah, this is considered like a philosophical insight. The God beyond God. Not the God that you've constructed with your brain, but the God beyond God. What's that? Well, your own nature, your own human nature. That's what it is. That's it. It's the place in which you have mystical experiences.
Figure, like our first, was a trained philosopher. Because of his own direct mystical experiences and visions, he considered himself to be the seal of the saints. That is the greatest of them all. And he suggested that the saints know more than the prophets did. The lore around this astonishing figure contained numerous stories of what we would today recognize as clairvoyance, mind-reading, telepathy, even materialization and teleportation. He wrote many books, which included famous lines like these. If a Gnostic is really a Gnostic, he cannot stay tied to one form of belief. He will not remain trapped in one belief. He accepts all kinds of beliefs, but does not remain tied to any figurative or symbolic belief. Or again, beware of being bound up by a particular religion and rejecting all others as unbelief. If you do that, you will fail to obtain a great benefit. Nay, you will fail to obtain the true knowledge of reality. Try to make yourself a kind of prime matter or putty for all forms of religious belief. God is wider and greater than to be confined to a particular religion to the exclusion of others.
Oh my gosh, how could anybody make a claim that one religion was truer than others? Because, again, there's multiple theories of truth. There's two theories of truth, and anybody who's familiar, which he should be, again, at the head of a PhD program, again, one of the most prominent scholars in America regarding esoteric traditions. There has to be philosophical presuppositions for existence itself, and therefore we look at paradigms a la Quine, and we look at the comprehensiveness and the compatibility and the coherency of worldviews to then determine which one would be more true than others. So in fact, if truth does exist, not all religions could be equally true. Even within their own worldview, all religions would be truer than another. There'd have to be a spectrum of truth of which different religious traditions were truer than other religious traditions, if in fact there is an objective truth. But what you'll notice throughout this whole thing is a sort of undermining of any epistemic position, that he continually undermines the idea that there is a sort of objective ability to describe a religious structure as being more true than another.
Echoing our religion of no religion, the same man had a name for the ability to shape the prime matter or putty of the soul, to curate consciousness in and through all the relative figures of religious belief. He called this state of consciousness the station of no station. Our third figure taught at a school you will recognize, Harvard Divinity School, where he once gave a famous sermon. In this sermon, this man denied the unique divinity of Christ, affirmed the divinity of the infinite soul, that is of us, and celebrated the revelations of individual religious experience in the present and future. He called on his listeners, quote, to live with the privilege of the immeasurable mind, unquote, and move beyond what he called historical Christianity, an institution whose worship of Jesus as the only divine human being and idolatrous reliance on the Bible as somehow final, he found particularly odious.
Yeah, that is just odious. Can you believe the pure evil of those Christians who believe that God actually became a single man? I am not Jesus Christ, and that God's truth was revealed in Scripture. And so what this then person who worships himself calls idolatry. Hilarious. And you know what's so funny about all this stuff? As if you go back to the human potential movement, you'll see that one of the places, or one of the big supporters of it, was the European Union. Let's see here. Where did I find that at? It was the EU, who is a big promoter and like backing. It was Human Potential Movement in Europe. Yeah, here it is. Funded by the European Union, the public development courses in the 1980s and 90s. So we all know that the EU definitely loves you. And so it's so funny how we would obviously be very cautious of anything that the EU supports. And in fact, the EU has supported this development of this religion of no religious, i.e. the human potential movement, the spiritual but not religious, and this idea of advancing our capabilities, our potentials as innately divine and spiritual, and also the betterment of the collective itself.
What he wanted was an individualized form of spirituality that is fundamentally open to present and future revelations, and not just past ones. The goal of the religious life for him was not Christianity, it was what he called consciousness. By consciousness, he did not mean the ego or ordinary awareness. He did not mean what I think we're all in at the moment. He meant something much grander. He meant something fundamentally cosmic. Hence, he would write lines like this: man is a stream whose source is hidden. Our being is descending into us from we know not whence. Or in one of his most famous lines, itself based on his own mystical experiences again, he wrote, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or particle of God. So there are our three examples of the religion of no religion. Who were they? Our first figure was a medieval German professor whom we now call Meister Eckhart. He died in 1328. His birth...
Yeah, and again, not a saint in the Orthodox Church, nobody that we would recommend listening to Meister Eckhart, who then, he's the one that told the original thing that he said was Meister Eckhart told them not to worship God as a person or the idolatry of Scripture, that you yourself am God. Now, we know that the West doesn't have the doctrine of theosis, and so divinization in the West it is not understood in the same way. It comes in a sort of Luciferian context of which we see here.
His name was Eckhart von Holkheim. Meister was an academic title that meant simply master. We would today say Professor Eckhart. Our second example was Ibn al-Arabi, a Muslim mystic and philosopher who was active in the 12th and 13th centuries, and who was born in cosmopolitan Spain. Our third example was Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great Bostonian transcendentalist. So that is what the religion of no religion looks like historically, a paradoxical theology created by trained intellectuals and professors out of their own mystical experiences. I should add that such a way of speaking of God and religion has not been terribly well received by the religions. Meister Eckhart was put on trial as he was dying, and many of his teachings were subsequently condemned by the papacy. The man died.
Rightfully so. His teachings were not very Christian.
A harassed author. Ibn al-Arabi's disciples called their master the reviver of religion. His critics called him the killer of religion. One Egyptian ruler was so upset with what Ibn al-Arabi wrote that he tied one of his books to the tail of a dog. Nor have the condemnations stopped. The Egyptian government banned this man's books as late as the 1970s, and they are still blacklisted to this day in Saudi Arabia. As for Ralph Waldo Emerson, within a few weeks of his Harvard sermon, the local Boston press was filled with vehement attacks. Charges of atheism, insult, and blasphemy flew. He was expelled from Harvard for 25 years. He would become Ralph Waldo Emerson, as we know him today, precisely by leaving the church, not by being some sort of good Christian. As my colleague April DeConnick recently pointed out in a lecture of her own, Emerson's resignation letter actually hangs here in Houston, in a library of another kind of church named after him, Emerson Unitarian. All three men, of course, lived in intensely religious social contexts in which there was little secular room for the nuanced worldview that they were espousing with such precision and provocation. What does such a religious orientation look like when the social and legal contexts are more secular, when people of such convictions are no longer afraid for their safety or their livelihoods? What happens when the mystical theology that is the religion of no religion becomes a broad-based social movement in a secularizing society? Part 3, Esalen. This, I want to suggest, is exactly what has happened over the last 2 centuries in American culture.
And he'll reference Russia, but again, the Esalen Institute has a long collaboration with the CIA, intelligence agencies in America, the Soviet Union, and so it's really interesting how our government is so supportive. Many of the movers and shakers that I would argue many of the teachers who taught at Esalen would be critical of, that those same institutional powers, of course, we know that Timothy Leary worked with the CIA, that the Esalen Institute itself has a long history of their interest in Gestalt therapy. This was one way, a sort of psychological therapy to get people into these altered states of consciousness, group psychedelic use, various activities for, again, the exploration of altered states of consciousness and these human potentials, getting people to have sensory perception. One of the things he'll reference is there's a whole experiment here in this book describing how the Esalen Institute developed this relationship with the Soviet Union and these various Russian mystics who claimed that they could do remote viewing. And so there was an experiment done at Esalen, according to Kripal in this book, where one person would be in Esalen, which is in Big Sur, California, very beautiful place, and another person I think was in Moscow. And that these psychics that one person could go into these altered states holding something in their hand. I think it was like a toy elephant or something. And so holding the toy elephant, the person in Russia who was doing the remote viewing could tap into his psyche and then know what exactly he was holding, or enter into that room and he could see what they're holding. And so very interesting experiments that were done at a time in which, this is the 1980s, the tensions between the U.S. and Russia were very, very high and critical at the time, right? This is the Soviet Union. And as Kripal will mention in this presentation, that Carter didn't even attend the Olympics that year because they were in Russia. However, the people at the Esalen Institute were always invited and had warm welcomes by the Soviet Union.
So we can start almost anywhere in American history. We could start, for example, with the man who first used the word spirituality in its modern sense, the poet Walt Whitman in 1871 in his Democratic Vistas, to be exact. Before Whitman, nobody had used the word spirituality in the way we use it today. It existed, but it meant something completely different. Here is the very first occurrence of that oh-so-modern word. Whitman wrote that only in the perfect uncontamination and solitariness of individuality may the spirituality of religion come forth at all. Whitman expressed this same spiritual individualism in his greatest poem, Leaves of Grass. Leaves here functioning as a metaphor for religious scriptures, which for Whitman are real revelations that emerge from us and must someday fall off or be shed. Listen to the great bard sing as he affirms and denies the religions at the same time. We consider the Bibles and religions divine. I do not say they are not divine. I say they have all grown out of you and may grow out of you still. It is not they who give the life. It is you who give the life. Leaves are not more shed from the trees or trees from the earth than they are shed out of you. We can easily find the same with...
And you can see why somebody hearing that might find that really, really appealing. Oh, you're right. You're right. Trees are living and trees shed leaves. And when I look at the world, I'm living and I must be like the leaves. I must be the source of life. I must be the living entity. Well, that's all based, again, on a sort of natural philosophy, a naturalistic theology, the naturalistic observation of the world itself, which then I can just somehow miraculously have all my logic and numbers and concepts and worldview, and then I can just observe nature and I can come to these ultimate conclusions. That's a bit of a problem. And so, again, even Walt Whitman with his transcendentalism and sort of romanticism, American romanticism, that's what it is. It's a divinization and a sort of worship of nature, which is a rejection of the possibility of revelation, because as for at least Dr. Kripal and many of these human potential movement advocates, it's entirely rooted within the Big Bang evolutionary cosmology. So there is no need for a creator God. There is no creator God. And dealing with, again, like the tag argument, the necessary presuppositions for existence itself, not interested of where logic come from. I can just observe nature and come to these ultimate conclusions. And so somebody who hasn't listened to myself or Dyer or Jim Bob, somebody or Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, somebody always hammering again these presuppositions, these paradigms, they might hear what Dr. Kripal says about Walt Whitman. That's beautiful. That's it. That's exactly what I believe.
Whitmanian themes in the advertised subject of my lecture this evening. Esalen was founded in the fall of 1962. Assumptions aside, it was not a child of the counterculture. Indeed, it well predated the counterculture. Its most immediate intellectual, spiritual, and psychological roots reach back to the 1950s, to the experiences of its two founders, Michael Murphy and the late Richard Price. Both men had breakout spiritual experiences in the 1950s. Price's occurred in the North Beach district of San Francisco through Buddhist meditation and beat culture. Murphy's occurred in a college classroom with a professor of comparative religion named Frederick Spiegelberg. Indeed, both Price and Murphy studied with Professor Spiegelberg. Both men were graduates of Stanford. Spiegelberg's own story is well worth dwelling on for a moment, as it was Spiegelberg who coined the phrase, the religion of no religion, that I have borrowed as my own for this evening. It will probably not surprise you to learn that Spiegelberg's coining of the phrase was a later intellectual framing of a profound mystical experience that he had known as a young man in 1917. At that point in time, he was studying medieval Latin theology, which no doubt included Professor Eckhart, at the University of Halle. One bright spring day during this time, the young man took a walk through a wheat field laced with blue cornflowers and red poppies. As he walked through the field, he writes his, quote, usual everyday consciousness vanished, and he felt instead something deep, something holy. He calls this other being his higher self. Within this altered state of consciousness, he now, quote,
how would he know that's his higher self, right? Epistemic claim there.
Sees the bright glance of some supercosmic sun shining from the center of every creature around him, unquote. All of reality has become perfect and holy, he describes. What he calls secular life has faded away. Then, while still enjoying this cosmic presence in everything that is, something stops him in his tracks, something both traditionally religious and deeply disturbing. And I'm going to let him speak. He's speaking in the third person, but this is Spiegelberg. He suddenly approaches around the corner of the road, a church, and the sight of the church gives him a shock. For what on earth is a church doing in his glorified world? What can be behind these stone walls? What means this colored light behind the windows? And what these strange sounds of music which reach his ears? All the world around has been holy, has been God's eternal nature, has been his face and his expression. Therefore, and this is what shocks him, if there is really anything else, anything peculiar behind those walls, it can only be a matter outside God, in contrast with, or even in opposition to, this eternal bliss of the all-penetrating holiness.
So anything that'd be inside that church would have to be other than God, because God's just in nature.
Now, such a feeling and such an experience, Spiegelberg goes on to tell his readers, has always meant one thing: the birth of the religion of no religion. Such a religion of no religion must deny the gods in the churches, but not for the sake of denial or some angry anti-religious platform. After all, the entire natural universe is divine. It makes no more sense to bow down to a lord in the clouds than it does to build a church in the midst of a shimmering, divine, conscious wheat field. Everything that is holy. Paradoxically, then, this...
So there is no good or bad? There is no such thing as evil? What if somebody totally rejected the religion of non-religion and went on a killing rampage? Is that divine? Is that human nature expressing its divinity? You see, the problem with these worldviews is that it breaks down the barrier and distinction between things. In its pursuit for unity, for the unity over multiplicity, it does the exact same thing where we come back to a moral relativism, an epistemic relativism, because the distinctions and differentiations between things must be some type of an illusion or some type of a culturally constructed perspective that is limiting somebody from seeing reality as it really is.
Denial of the gods of the church and of every accepted notion of God leads always to the conception of what he calls new names for God. The religion of no religion, in other words, is not the end of religion. Rather, it is the beginning of new types of religion, a kind of creative void that denies the old in order to create the new.
So it denies the old, it denies everything that's traditional, and really, this is the break in our culture. It's whether somebody calls themselves a Republican or a conservative, or if they're a boomer of one sort or another, the split in our society really comes down to, at a presuppositional level, is the differentiation between tradition and this idea of progress and this idea of moving away from traditional understandings like male and female. That's antiquated, guys. Now there's infinite genders. In fact, it's performative gender theory. So I can keep my beard, I could put some tissues in a bra, and for all intensive purposes, I could be Woman of the Year. Just let you know, men are better at being women than women are, according to Caitlyn Jenner. And what was the transgender chick or dude that just won a beauty pageant? He looked terrible. It was like a fat Asian dude with like facial hair. It was horrific.
It is the ground, at once full and empty, of the history of religions. As with our other three exponents of the religion of no religion, it is surely no accident that the man who inspired the founders of Esalen was also a political refugee from Nazi Germany. Frederick was no fuzzy thinker or dilettante. He was a radical theologian, a friend of Paul Tillich and Martin Heidegger, whose public speeches and writings were tracked by the Nazi thought police, and who had to flee for his life from his own home. It was this religion of no religion, it was this radical intellectual that Michael Murphy and Dick Price learned at Stanford University in the 1950s. They also learned about the Upanishads and Hinduism, about Tibetan Buddhism, Sufism, and Neoplatonism. Not surprisingly, both men dedicated themselves to a contemplative practice. Murphy's Hindu in accent, Price's Buddhist, neither quite traditional. Both men also went through life-changing events around 1956. Dick had suffered his way through a psychotic break and enlightenment experience that was shut down by brutal psychiatric intervention. He was basically imprisoned in a psychiatric institution for 16 months and given almost 70 electric and chemical shock treatments to bring him back to normality. Murphy spent 16 months in India, where he lived in the ashram of Sri Aurobindo, a psychically gifted writer who had envisioned evolution as both a biological and an occult process that was leading to what he called alternately the supermind, or the Gnostic Superman. This, by the way, was well before the guy with the cape and blue and red tights, but it was well after Nietzsche. In any case, here at the core of Murphy's founding vision for Esalen, we encounter the divinization of the human being again, big time. Above all, though, Esalen would come to be about something called the human potential. This is probably the key of the whole thing.
Yep.
The phrase was drawn directly from the writings of Aldous Huxley, the great British-American novelist and essayist. The phrase, the human potential, captured a broad band of ideas and practices whose basic claim, for Huxley and for Mike and Dick, was that human beings possess immense, untapped reservoirs of consciousness and energy that cultures have repressed in different ways, but that we today can actualize and develop into a more integral vision of an evolving supernature, ours. Behind Huxley's notion of human potentialities laid another key idea, namely that the brain is not the producer of mind, but its filter, receiver, reducer, and transmitter. By the way, it's important to know that Aldous came from a very distinguished scientific family. His grandfather, T.H. Huxley, was the defender of Darwin, and his brother Julian was a great biologist. So he's
Yes, so you got to believe Aldous because his dad promoted Darwin, which, again, most intellectually honest people will agree that Darwinian theory of evolution just doesn't fit even the timeline according to modern cosmologists. And then Julian, of course, the eugenicist who wanted to depopulate the majority of the planet. I mean, brilliant mind. These guys are brilliant. These guys are great biologists, you know. And Aldous Huxley, you know, talking about the Brave New World and already knowing about the agenda for the 21st century. I mean, these guys, they get it. They get it. They already knew the religion of the future. It's the religion of no religion, guys. It's all about the development of human potential.
He's well aware of the science. In this model, often called the filter thesis, the trick becomes how to alter or suppress the brain filter so that mind can shine into the body brain and reveal itself for what it is, cosmic and probably immortal. What we might call the three Ps came to dominate the answers about how to suppress brain for the sake of this supermind or cosmic spirit. Those three Ps were psychology, psychical research, and psychedelics. Countless other therapies, meditation techniques, and teachings would follow over the next 5 decades, but many of them had the same basic logic, how to shut down or how to suppress normal brain function so that other forms of mind can come on. And of course, the most common one is just meditation, just same sort of principle. But there were other, sometimes more effective ways too. The Institute has had an indirect but profound influence on American culture. Many of the practices and ideas the Institute stood for, virtually alone in 1962, from meditation and yoga to the synthesis of evolutionary biology and theology, are now common features of American public culture. Looked at most broadly.
And that is a fact, guys. This synthesis of evolution and theology, as he said, that absolutely is a presupposition for the vast majority of the American public, whether they call themselves whatever religion. I would even argue that there's probably a minority of Christians who actually believe in creationism as described as from the Bible, you know, outside of a macro form of evolution. Now, speciation, as we talked before, the idea that sharks inhabit different niches within the ocean environment and therefore develop different phenotype expressions which maximize their capabilities within that niche environment. Yes, we believe in speciation. We believe in microevolution. That does not counter our argument of creation or a creator God. It definitely doesn't necessitate then as long as a timeline as the modern cosmology theories. But my point being is that I think he's absolutely spot on. Again, psychology, psychotherapies, and psychedelics, these three P's were essential in the development, again, of this human potential, the sort of new anthropology. And this anthropology, because there is no creator God, there is no image of God. And if there is no image of God, there's nothing that we can really destroy. So blending us with technologies or doing various therapies or performing group sex, all this stuff is just good because it's going to aid us in the further development. And if it transgresses traditional Christian boundaries, well, then this is progress. And we need to do this because we need to shatter these culturally confined, limiting expectations of these antiquated religious traditions.
One might locate 4 general periods in this history: the social conservatism of the 1950s, the counterculture of the 60s and 70s, the rise of the religious right in the 1980s and 90s, and our own critical present, tottering between conservatism and liberalism before the specters of fundamentalism and terrorism. The counterculture certainly did not appear out of nowhere. It was a creative reaction against the sheer fear and stunted staidness of what Henry Miller had called the air-conditioned nightmare of American society in the 1950s. Think violent racial segregation, unquestioned gender roles, McCarthyism, and the backyard bomb shelter. The 60s thus gave us the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the sexual revolution, psychedelia, rock and roll, early gay rights, and a new fascination with Asian religions. There were, of course, as many casualties as causes here. The baby boomers mellowed and matured, and the unprecedented freedoms this era released were too much for too many too soon. Hence the birth of the counterculture, that is the rise of the religious right in the 80s. 80s and 90s.
So what he's talking about there is the rise of American evangelicism and like TV preachers and all that different stuff. The 1980s saw a reaction against the 1960s counterculture and what he tried to describe as the counterculture. And so many proponents of the counterculture see the counterculture, and this has also been discussed in sociology and all this different stuff, is that it wasn't until the 1980s and the response of evangelical Christianity was a sort of the response to the degradation perceived from the 1960s counterculture by traditional Christians. Now, as we know, as Orthodox, we would say the evangelical movement itself is totally co-opted in its veneration of Zionism, its theology, its pursuit of its very emotive and emotionalism and stuff like that. Sola Scriptura brings in postmodern understandings of hermeneutics and relativism, all this different stuff. So we certainly aren't big promoters of evangelicism, but that's what he's talking about as the Christian counterculture. He's talking about the dramatic rise of American evangelicism in the 1980s.
And then I have a section here on really the grandfather of all of this was actually Henry Miller. Henry Miller was this banned erotic author who moved into Big Sur and who hung out at early Esalen. And at one point, he used to joke. People would ask him how people could buy his books, and he said, "Well, just visit any port and go to the building where they keep all the confiscated goods," and that's where all of his books were. At one point, there were no less than 41 legal battles being fought over Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. And it was these legal battles that eventually, the other texture was Allen Ginsberg's, Howl, by the way. And it was a result of these legal battles that this whole category of obscenity was eliminated from our legal system. And this is what laid the legal foundations for the Beat Generation, the counterculture, and the sexual revolution of the 1960s and 70s. So it was fought out in the courts, essentially, before it really sort of exploded in the culture. The first seminar in Big Sur at Esalen took place on September 22nd and 23rd in 1962. The next few years brought in their wake a dizzying display of names. These included Alan Watts, the Buddhist teacher, Arnold Toynbee, the philosopher, Paul Tillich, the theologian, Gregory Bateson, the great biologist who actually lived at Esalen for a number of years, Ansel Adams, the photographer, Fritz Perls, the psychologist, Abraham Maslow, Ida Rolf, the Rolfer, Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass, Ken Casey, J.B. Ryan, the parapsychologist, B.F. Skinner, the great behaviorist, Carl Rogers, Rollo May, Buckminster Fuller, and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, to name just a few. Bizarrely, a young Hunter Thompson, who had not yet written a book, was the gate guard, believe it or not. Until that is, he got into a fight with some gay men in the baths. They beat the crap out of him. And he responded by shooting out the windows in the Murphy's vacation home where he was living. That was the end of Hunter Thompson. The list of topics and ideas was dizzying, but there was a theology and a psychology creating the space for all of this to happen. Spiegelberg's Religion of No Religion, which allowed them to look fairly and sympathetically at any religion, any religious idea, and Huxley's Human Potentialities, which helped them to psychologize all of this and think about this in a very theoretical sense. Then there were the folk festivals organized by Joan Baez, who lived at Esalen as well. The pop stars, George Harrison and Ringo Starr actually landed on the front lawn of Esalen in their own private helicopter at one point. And we could go on and on. I could go on and on all night telling you stories and dropping names. We can maybe do that in the fourth and fifth hour. The place was, as we say, happening. We can't do that, obviously, and we're not going to do that. I wrote 500 pages on this history, and I failed there, so we're not going to complete it tonight. Let me just tell you one story from this Esalen history. I've selected it for two reasons. First, because it's often said that the spiritual but not religious crowd somehow have no social sense. They don't care about social or political issues. That's clearly false, and this story displays that quite stunningly. And second, because this particular Esalen story climaxes just outside of Houston in Clear Lake, so it's a local story as well. It was during the 1970s and the height of the Cold War that Esalen began its diplomatic ventures into the Soviet Union. The key figure here was a woman named Dulcie Murphy, Michael's wife. Dulcie led these programs for decades and still runs an institute for the same in Mill Valley. No one in the late 1960s would have guessed that such a thing would ever have been possible. Indeed, it appears that the Nixon administration tried to bring Esalen down by linking it to the Charles Manson murders. Abigail Folger, the coffee heiress who was among the murdered, had attended an Esalen seminar, and Sharon Tate happened to be at Esalen the night before the gruesome events. But there simply was no causal link between Esalen and the Manson crimes. Indeed, if the memory of one former Esalen staff member I interviewed is correct, Manson himself had been refused entrance to the grounds a few weeks before the events unfolded. He was just too scary and weird. That was the Nixon era. Both the Carter and the Reagan administration supported Esalen's diplomatic efforts with the Soviet Union, if always behind the scenes. What is so interesting here is, again, what we might call the mystical origins of this political activity. really psychical origins. The Esalen activists were initially drawn to the Soviet Union largely because of its parapsychological research programs, and many of their initial contacts there were parapsychologists, mediums, psychics, and mystics. A particular fascination here was the orthodox trope of theosis, or human divinization again.
Oh, the trope, that orthodox trope of theosis. But again, theosis, just for anybody listening who may not be familiar, it's very different from this process of human potential movement. The human potential movement is fundamentally arguing that the human nature is in fact divine, and what we have to do is sort of participate in various practices to realize our inner divinity so that we can then express that divinity to the world, and that the development of my human potentials, be it clairvoyance or prophecy or foretelling events or emotional understandings of people, whatever super sensory or supernatural ability people have, we need to start pursuing these, often associated with divine people or saints or monks or holy men from different traditions, that we need to develop this so that we can then realize that we are in fact our own gods. And so then it's funny how they use the trope of theosis within Orthodoxy, which, yes, is about human divinization, but the ways in which that divinizing process occurs is so radically different from these sort of scientific, secular pursuits, these commodifying world religious, consumerism, that I can consume all these different practices to pursue my human potential. Theosis is rooted in the idea that God, the Godhead, is by definition having divine nature, and that divine nature incarnated, unifying human nature, and that we can then move into divine nature through the participation in these uncreated energies of God. And that means being moral, that means being truthful, being logical, honor, glory, mercy, compassion, all these things. That, have you heard any of that in regards to the human potential movement? Oh, no, but I'm sure social justice would be presented as how ethical and how merciful and compassionate these people are. Ultimately, they worship themselves. And theosis is not about worshiping yourselves. The only way a person can participate in the orthodox theosis, in this movement into eternal divinity, is by humbling themselves, submitting themselves to God, submitting themselves to the church founded by the apostles, the Eastern Orthodox Church, and then participating in all these uncreated energies. So the life of the Orthodox Christian participating in theosis is very, very different than the Westerner participating in the religion of no religion or the human potential movement and the actualization of these extrasensory or extra supernatural abilities, equating then this as the sort of divinizing process. That's what he's drawing a parallel to, is that the human potential movement and the way that it's ultimately going to want to use technologies and various forms of psychology or psychedelics or whatever, this is basically the same thing of theosis in the Orthodox Church, but because, again, we don't need to do anything with religions, all the religions are antiquated and they're nonsense and they don't mean anything and they're culturally constructed, therefore we can just take that theosis, that trope, and just utilize that for our experimentation of our psychic abilities and capabilities.
Once in the Soviet Union, the same Esalen figures quickly learned that they could do other things that official governments could not do. Such efforts included things like attending and giving speeches at the 1980 Olympics in Moscow, with a wink and a nod from the Carter administration that had boycotted the same Olympics, or attending photo shoots featuring an American Apollo astronaut, Rusty Schweickart, and the personal faith healer of Leonid Brezhnev, or engaging in telepathic experiments from Moscow to San Francisco with their Russian friends, uniting in mind what had become separated by national politics, or working with Stephen Wozniak of Apple Computers to organize the first space bridge for a double rock concert that was staged in San Bernardino in Moscow and then projected via satellite on huge screens. Basically, they got a bunch of kids in San Bernardino in Moscow, and they brought in these bands, and they filmed them and then beamed the Moscow kids to the American kids and the American kids to the Moscow kids. It was a deeply symbolic thing. No one thought it would work. No one thought the Russians would even acknowledge it. Turns out it was on the nightly news, probably because one of the bands they staged was Men at Work. So there's a kind of socialist theme there. Dulce and Michael lived in Moscow for months at a time, not as protected diplomats, but as guests and neighbors in real neighborhoods, where they became close friends of journalists, scientists, and activists of all sorts. This was at the very nadir of the Cold War. Those of you who remember that, probably almost everyone in this room, it was a very dark time. Back at home, the Esalen actors would lead the charge to bring Russian writers, scientists, artists, and high-ranking government officials to America to see for themselves that Americans were not all evil imperialists. It was all this that gave Esalen a real reputation in Washington. Hence, when Stephen Rhinesmith was appointed by President Reagan in 1986 to facilitate Russian-American exchanges, he was told immediately that it needed to go to Esalen. That, after all, was where the real diplomatic action was going on. Almost done. How about this story? Such effects bore dramatic fruit in 1989, when Esalen was chosen to sponsor Boris Yeltsin's trip to America, where the politician was converted to capitalism in a Houston grocery store, probably a Randall's in Clear Lake. They wouldn't answer my call. Randall's wouldn't. Apparently, there are no historians at Randall's grocery store. So I can only speculate that it was a Randall's. There, in the grocery store, the last remnant of his Bolshevism dissolved before a plethora of brightly lit fruits, vegetables, meats, and a single shopping woman who answered Boris's polite questions about how much of her monthly income she spent on such spectacular groceries. Yeltsin realized immediately that her answer represented a mere fraction of what Russians were spending on very poor food in very long lines back at home. Yeltsin's aides have identified that moment in that grocery store as the turning point in Yeltsin's political life. He quit the party after that American visit. His stereotypes of both America and capitalism had been completely shattered. He had been told, for example, that the Statue of Liberty looked like a witch, and that people in New York lived in crime-ridden slums. But the Lady of Liberty was quite beautiful. He flew around her in a helicopter. The New York streets were friendly and bright, and even its slums, Boris commented, could pass for decent housing in the Soviet Union. A few months later, Boris Yeltsin was standing on a tank in front of the Russian parliament building. The rest is, as we say, history. A side note, as I was writing this lecture, I received an email from my colleagues at Esalen, who were contacted by an exhibition planning firm in New York City that is designing a museum for the Boris Yeltsin Presidential Center in Russia. They were asking about photos of Boris in the Randall's grocery store. Okay, conclusion. We're almost done here, folks. Much has happened since 1989, of course, but we are out of time. For the rest, I say, go read the book. But what to say at the end of our evening together? I have 4 quick things I want to get on the table for you. About the American legal context of our present religion of no religion, about the very real dilemmas of religious tolerance that the religion of no religion represents, about the role that the comparative study of religion has played in all of this, and about the spiritual but not religious youth culture. Okay? So these will go quickly. First of all, the American legal context. The first thought I would like to leave you with this evening is the suggestion that Esalen's religion of no religion is both very ancient and very new. Rooted in a very extensive knowledge and appreciation of comparative mystical literature and the history of religions, the founding and flourishing of Esalen has also been a deeply American phenomenon. Its religion of no religion is deeply American because it encodes in theological form one of the core principles of the American Constitution, the separation of church and state. In America, after all, anyone can be religious in almost any way precisely because there is no religion.
And this is not something to be celebrated in my mind, because what it does is that secularism is an umbrella in which that religion must be subservient to. And so in America, due to secularism, there can be no religious identity of the nation at whole. The sacred canopy, the unifying banner that we all identify with, is broken. And so what it is the First Amendment, and again, from the general persons, from anybody with a libertarian or the general Americana worldview, oh, that's great. First Amendment allows religious expression, and therefore this is wonderful. We can all be religious in our own way. I understand the pursuit to avoid tyrannical control or things like that. However, again, anybody who's read history knows that within the Fatimid Caliphate that took over northern Africa, many Christians lived under those powers. It's always existed. Not like everybody had to convert. Whatever nation or authority structure, whatever religion they were, and Sunni Muslims. The Fatimid Caliphate was a Shia Muslim caliphate, which the majority of the people it ruled were Sunni Muslim, and it had a large, significant portion of Christians over in Alexandria, Egypt, all of which were allowed to practice their own form of religion. Now, in America, we have secularism that promises these freedoms, yet what secularism does is it erodes any sort of ultimate power or authority or truth claim of religion itself, because to be in a secular world is to assume that secularism must be a more authoritative perception, worldview, ideology, concept than any of the religions themselves, which then must be lower than and diminutive to secularism. So where he sees secularism as a great thing, I see secularism as a detrimental sort of a process that was always going to lead to the state that we are now, of total sort of irreligiosity. However, people's irreligiosity within secularism can be redefined as religion, which is exactly what the religion of no religion is.
There is no official religion, not supposed to be anyway. Every American religion is, in this technical sense, a religion of no religion. That is, every religion can flourish precisely because no one gets to speak for everyone else. This same separation of church and state is also, of course, why the religion of no religion can flourish today, whereas it was more or less restricted to persecuted intellectuals and professors in previous centuries, as we have seen. It is not, of course, the case that American secularism or the Constitution produced the religion of no religion. I'm not arguing that. It is that this secularism and that this Constitution allows it to be expressed in public and in freedom. So it's a generation or a generous thing. It's not a productive thing. Seen in this light, America becomes a truly subversive, mystical ideal. Precious few religious traditions, with the possible exception of groups like the Quakers and the Unitarians, seem to be aware of this. Few realize that the deepest theological and social implications of democracy are far more radical than any society, including our own, has dared to realize. Secondly, the dilemmas of religious tolerance. It is here that I think we need to come to terms with what we have called, mostly for lack of a better expression, religious tolerance. We might define religious tolerance as the civic virtue of not attempting to suppress religious worldviews that compete with, contradict, or even deny those of the majority worldview. Both religious tolerance and religious freedom are central to most liberal societies, of course, but it should also be recognized that both civic virtues come with very heavy religious costs. Religious tolerance, after all, boils down to a willingness to not act on one's own religious beliefs.
So it's a good thing to not act on your own religious beliefs, especially if you come from a traditional religion. But if you're part of the religion of no religion, well, then because of the dissolution of boundaries, you should act on your religious beliefs, which means promoting your progressive agenda, your social justice, your whatever movements he was very supportive of the 1960s counterculture, and then develop and actualize your human potential by whatever means possible.
But religious revelations and states of enlightenment are not experienced or transmitted as options to believe or not to believe. They intervene with overwhelming power and force into the lives of individuals and communities and make ultimate, universal, absolute truth claims. The problem, of course, that there have not been one or two of these revelations and salvations, but hundreds, if not actually thousands. Right? So, for example, when in the Exodus story, God didn't appear to Moses and carve the law onto the rock, and the law didn't say, well, maybe do this or maybe do that, and please get along with the Egyptians. No, didn't say that at all. Or when the Buddha preached that none of us have a soul, there is no self, he didn't mean just people in North India don't have a soul or self. He means no one does. So these are absolute truth claims that are being made. We have to acknowledge this basic problem of religious pluralism and the fundamental incompatibility of religious teachings. We need to stop pretending otherwise. Religions, to the extent that they make universal claims about the human condition, are structurally intolerant.
Religions that make universal claims about the human condition are structurally intolerant. Is that claim about structural intolerance, the universal claim about other religions, part of the religion of no religion, is that intolerant as well? It seems like that's exactly what you're saying, Dr. Kripal. In all due respect, it seems like the criticism that you laid forth is actually undermined by the same truth claim that you're making. And so that's part of that contradiction that I was talking about earlier. And so if your religion, you shouldn't act on your religion. And any religion that makes a universal truth claim about the nature or the state of human affairs, or that we're fallen, or again, that Jesus Christ is God, is totally intolerant and shouldn't be accepted. Only in the name of tolerance, though, right? It's only intolerant because I'm tolerant and I'm progressive and I accept everything. But anybody who makes universal truth claims, and they're intolerant, even though I'm making a universal truth claim in negation of their universal truth claim. But, don't pay attention.
Our unconscious operating system. If we are ever going to solve our religious problems, we will have to address those deep operating systems. We will have to rewrite them, or short of that, learn to handle them with more nuance and sophistication. It is a basic mismatch between our own modern values and those of the ancient worlds that produced these religions that is the real problem here. We thus tend to think today of religious tolerance and religious freedom as nice virtues that are self-evident and come without cost, when in fact they directly contradict and seriously undermine each and every strong religious claim. The Roman Catholic priest then had it exactly right when he said this about the comparative religion college of the 16th century Indian Mughal Emperor Akbar. The priest wrote, "The king cares little that in allowing everyone to follow his or her own religion, he was in reality violating all." The priest was correct.
Well, that's exactly what I just said secularism does, of which then he was in favor of. So the destruction of all religions, Dr. Kripal, as a comparative a comparative religious studies scholar, is in favor of that undermining process, because then it gives way and gives space for his religion of no religion, which is a religion, but it's not in the category of religion because it undermines all the world religions, but it still makes universal truth claims about ultimate importance and the destiny of human potential, which then makes it a sort of minor religion.
Every fundamentalist who says more or less the same thing today. We do not, of course, have to agree with the specific answers of the Catholic priest or the contemporary fundamentalist, but I do think we have to acknowledge the cost of religious tolerance that they are all accurately identifying. Obviously, I'm all for religious tolerance, all for religious freedom, but I think we have to acknowledge what it is and what we're actually saying. This is where the religion of no religion comes in, as it is a religious position that fully understands what's being asked and meets this challenge as a religious problem. It does not tinker with surface things, as if we can just politely ignore our obvious differences or not read all of those very painful passages in the scriptures. No, it meets all of
those very painful passages in the scriptures. You don't want to read that. Don't read the scriptures. They're so painful.
this head on, goes deep, and reprograms the operating system itself. Please note that the religion of no religion is not a multiple choice test. It is not a choice for this or that religion. Nor is it some innocent act of religious tolerance or an expression of anything goes. Rather, it represents a fundamental change of the rules of the religious game. It is a reprogramming of the unconscious operating system that has been running our cultures and our religious egos for millennia. This is very serious business.
Undermining our religious egos, and yet at the same time, in all due respect, Dr. Kripal, you yourself are making the ultimate egoic claim by this whole undermining of religion, the intolerance of universal religious claims. Yet you yourself are doing the exact same thing in favor of your fundamental, liberal, progressive religion of no religion. Yes, he uses fundamental to describe people of the book or anybody who upholds to a traditional religion, and obviously in a pejorative way. Meanwhile, his religion of no religion is not fundamental because it's so progressive and liberal, but the fact that you're so dogmatic about your progress, the fact that you're so dogmatic about human nature being divine, in fact, you're so dogmatic about not making universal truth claims is creating sorts of mini dogmas. Now, they're not written down and they're not formalized by a sort of authoritative figure, a tyrannical person, but that's the point. That's this movement. The movement is the worship of self. The movement is you're your own pope. The movement, instead of the pope dictating your cultural constraints or any one religion, this whole thing, what it's all saying is, no, you get to do it yourself now. This is the point of human evolution, and this is the state of religion now, is that you get to be your own pope, and you get to dictate everything. Isn't that great? And therefore, nobody can make universal claims, because the new game that undermines the previous game of religion is that you don't have to belong to anything. You get to just pursue whatever you like and create your own experience to pursue your own human potential and your own mystical experiences.
The comparative study of religion. Obviously, if such a project is to be successful, and it may well fail, this is going to take a long time. I would suggest, though, that we've already begun such a project, whether we recognize it as such or not. Let me admit here what is probably already obvious to you by now, namely that what I have called the religion of no religion looks suspiciously like the comparative study of religion in the universities today. The professional comparative study of religion need not be a religion of no religion, or vice versa, of course, but there are real and obvious resonances here. There are also very real historical connections. As you now know, the religion of no religion was coined by a professor of comparative religion, who in turn inspired the founding of Esalen. One could hardly ask for a more obvious example. But this kind of academic gnosis is hardly restricted to the history of Esalen. Indeed, much of the modern study of religion can be thought of as a rationalized expression of the kinds of social activisms and countercultural mysticisms that have flowed through American life in the last 60 years. In effect, the altered states of the counterculture became the altered states or altered categories of the university. It is no accident, for example, that the explosion of comparative religion in American universities coincide exactly with the counterculture and its famous turn east. If this place was founded in the 1970s, it's in the same zone, same cultural zone. Nor is it an accident that race, class, and gender have come to define much of the humanities. These, after all, were precisely the concerns of the 1960s, via the civil rights movement, the sexual revolution, the prominence of Marxist thought, and the birth of feminist and gay consciousness in that still reverberating decade. To the extent that intellectuals and citizens still insist on placing these forms of thought at the very heart of our culture, they still inhabit what is essentially a countercultural state of consciousness. Fourth and finally, the spiritual but not religious. This is no longer just about the academy or the counterculture, of course. This is no longer about condemned medieval theologians, rejected Muslim mystics, banned Harvard intellectuals, or radical theologians fleeing Nazi Germany. This is about a broad-based religious orientation that has become the dominant moniker in the youth culture of today. This is the worldview for our children. A young woman recently showed me her page on Match.com. Just to be clear, this was my daughter. And you click what your religious orientation is, and hers said spiritual but not religious. And I said, well, did you make that up? And she said, no, Dad, that was a box. So I mean, this is where we're at. This is where this culture is.
And I do not disagree with him here. I, in fact, think that's exactly the presupposition of the majority of Gen Z, millennials included, but really millennials and Gen Z more so, is that this religion of no religion, this idea of pursuing one's own experience, pursuing one's own mystical pursuit, pursuing one's own super sensory or supernatural capabilities. This is a spiritual process, and therefore, because it's spiritual, it must be good. There is no ultimately right or wrong, and so group sex is spiritual. Sex with various people from whatever gender they identify from. This is all beneficial. This is progress. This is leading us closer towards what? Utopia? Interesting, because it seems like it's creating more chaos. But this is insane sophistry of trying to form a worldview on a negation. Exactly, it really is. The religion of no religion is a form of sophistry, which continually makes universal truth claims. It does the exact same thing that it criticizes all the other religions of doing. But notice, especially Christianity. Right? We didn't hear too many criticisms of Eastern mystical traditions, Hinduism, Buddhism, magic. No, all these things are promoted. You notice the one that it really doesn't like is Christianity, and then second would be Islam. So it's like the progressive liberal, the two religions that it really doesn't like Christianity, no matter what form it is. But then Islam, if it's not the good kind of Islam, if it's the Islam that can be used for minority people and celebrate and move forward the progressive agenda, well, then Islam's great. But if Islam says women don't have the same rights as men, oh my God, it needs to be destroyed. It's antiquated, it's barbaric, and it's a bigot form of religion.
The religion of no religion has become the spiritual but not religious. That's what it is right now. I confess that I am guardedly hopeful about all of this. The future remains, of course, uncertain and largely dependent on the choices that we make now. I hope that you take away this evening the happy conclusion that there are always more than two choices, that we do not need to choose between nihilism and fundamentalism or between secularism and spirit. We are much bigger and smarter than that. There is a third way. Like Ralph Waldo Emerson, we can choose to be concerned about consciousness and not Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or whatever the box is. We can choose our shared divine humanity over our constructed and relative religious egos. We can also shed the leaves of our religious scriptures just as easily as we once grew them. Certainly, Esalen's religion of no religion has given witness to all of this, even if its consciousness has not yet become culture, even if it remains only a utopian hope. Such a vision has captured the hearts of our youth in another form. We would do well, I think, to listen to them. We would also do well to remind them that they are hardly the first to draw these conclusions, and that the religion of no religion has existed in many cultures and many centuries before us, waiting for a time and a place to come into its own in public and in freedom. Whether that place and time is here and now remains to be seen. We will see. Thank you very much.
All right, guys, and that's going to conclude my stream on the religion of no religion. Again, this general concept that we must pursue our own experiences. The religion of no religion, specifically speaking, the one that we talked about today, is all about the development of human potential, which comes out of some of the 1960 counterculture and really the activities over at the Esalen Institute that were pursuing the advancement and the attaining of various supersensory or supernatural capabilities that people have. And therefore, the pursuit of these things are itself a spiritual practice. And so, as he said, like the many traditions before from around the world, all those great thinkers that basically promoted relativistic thinking and the promotion of subjective experience, that the religion of no religion is now the basic presupposition, the foundational presupposition of Gen Zers and millennials, and it's only going to continue. That the religion of no religion is going to, in a way, be the religion of the future. I think that's how they're going to appeal and get people to pursue transhumanism, because it's going to be couched in a sort of spiritual worldview, that the reason why you want to blend with machines, the reason why you want to be a cyborg, the reason why you want to do XYZ is because it propels you to the next level of your own evolution. It propels you to higher and higher capabilities and potentialities. And so here we see again something that if you tell somebody the religion of no religion, they're not going to know what the hell you're talking about. But I hope if this stream was useful, that now you have an understanding of what exactly this is and where it comes from. So with that being said, I'm now going to hop into some super chats, and I will answer I will go through the super chats right now. Guys, please hit that like if you're still here. Would greatly appreciate it. First super chat comes from Dr. Vagisil. Dr. Vagisil throws in $1 and said, "This relates to your previous stream about the destruction of American community. The U.S. doesn't have a shared culture, and all people have is consumer corporate culture. Christmas is about buying gifts to appease strangers instead of the birth of Christ." Yes, Dr. Vagisil, I absolutely do agree with that. And the collapse of the sacred canopy, what you call a shared culture and values, it absolutely has been torn apart and ripped to pieces in America, and we do not have a shared culture at this moment. So great point, Dr. Vagisil. I definitely agree with you there. The consumerism and the corporate culture, I think, then manifests itself in these perennialistic and these sort of commodifying forms of religion, like I would argue the religion of no religion really is. Dr. Vagisil throws in another super chat for $1 and says, "Thelema in Greek means the will, i.e. Matthew 6:10. Satan tries to get us to focus on ourselves and our own will, not necessarily him. Crowley named his school as such as Do What Thou Wilt, which is the current self-love deception." Yes, absolutely. And Dr. Vagisil, I've also talked about thelema, and again, apotheosis is the term specifically describing the sort of willful process of development of oneself, or self-divinization. And like you said, Satan doesn't get us to focus on Satan. Of course, there is theistic Satanism, and we'll be talking about that Friday. But the majority of the way it appears is through the worship of oneself, the worship of one's will, as if you yourself know what is ultimately good and which direction you should move in regard to your own life. Most people don't. But these worldviews, basically, because they are relativistic and do worship their own will, there can't be any right or wrong decision. If it makes you feel good and you're happy, then you should do it. And pretty soon that leads to various sinful addictions. Dr. Vagisil throws in another super chat for $3 and says, "Thinking of others and denying yourself is the core of Jesus, and that is why America has become less Christian, because people store money for self and don't know neighbor. We exalt self to get attention and become like Lucifer and his sweet lies." Amen, Dr. Vagisil. I totally agree with that, brother. And yeah, I've said this before, a great metaphor for why humility is superior to brutal violence is that all rivers flow into the ocean. The ocean is the largest body of water, right? The ocean is superior to any lake or river, and yet all bodies of water flow back into the ocean because the ocean itself is lower than. And so Christ's humility, the ultimate representation of humility, the ultimate representation of submission, the ultimate representation of lowering oneself is what exactly exalts him to be the ocean, the body that is so much larger than, and that which then we are all moving towards if we are moving in our natural direction towards God, that inclination towards God. So thank you so much, Dr. Vagisil. I couldn't agree more. Next super chat comes from Dr. Vagisil again, throws in $1 super chat and says, "Media values one night stand versus night with family, food Instapics versus cooking with grandma, DoorDash versus growing crops, getting girls' numbers versus helping friend in need. U.S. is man who Jesus said sell everything because charity is seen as weakness, greed is power." Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Vagisil. I couldn't agree more. And thank you, brother, for your super chats this evening. I really appreciate it. Next super chat comes from Day Jire, throws in $7.99. Shout out to Day Jire. God bless you. And says, "Dr. Nathan Jacobs has made a great movie titled Becoming Truly Human, and YouTube videos on the nuns, meaning the none of the above, spiritual, not religious, atheist, and Gnostic. Very insightful and from an Orthodox perspective. Okay, well, I'm not familiar with Dr. Nathan Jacobs. I'll have to check that out, Dayjire. So thank you so much for the recommendation. I'll definitely check out Dr. Nathan Jacobs. So everybody check out Dr. Nathan Jacobs and hit some of his research. He has a movie on Becoming Truly Human and YouTube videos on the nuns. So great piece of information. Thank you so much, Dayjire, and shout out to you. And it looks like the last and final super chat comes from Gabrielle Lopez. Throws in $9.99. Shout out to you, Gabriela Lopez. She says, "Thanks DPH for the awesome content and topic yet again. God bless." Well, thank you so much, and God bless you and your family. I don't know if it's Gabriella or I would assume it probably is Gabriella. So Gabriella, thank you so much for the $9.99 super chat. God bless you and your family and your husband. Hope everybody is doing well over in Montana. And so, guys, that is basically going to wrap up my stream tonight. So please hit that like button. And again, major shout out to everybody who super chatted. Major shout out to Dr. Vagisil. Major shout out to Gabriela Lopez. Major shout out to Dayjire. And that concludes all of the super chats. So guys, I'm going to hop off here. I will be back Monday with a sponsored stream on demonic magic. So we should have a pretty fun Friday night. So I will see you guys then. Until then.